you think about Churchill, there is no debate about his white supremacy. It's pretty much on record. The question here is, why is Churchill still hold the level of popularity that he does? Right? I mean, I've been in more than one public confrontation about Winston Churchill, and there is a kind of it's almost like he's been beatified, right? He's a saintly figure who's beyond reproach. And it's actually interesting because at the time, Churchill wasn't even that popular at the time. I mean, he was never elected, and after this war effort where he supposedly single-handedly led the world against the Nazis, he actually lost the election. So this is a kind of historical replacing him back on this pedestal. And the question you'd have to ask is, why is that? And so the argument I'm going to make here is that it's because he kind of is the perfect embodiment of white supremacy. If you think about the politics, think about his ideas, think about what he did, and some of the examples we've already seen. And why that has a mythic status is because that white supremacy is still the politics of the day, right? Like, we like to pretend that things have changed, that the logic of the British Empire and empires generally has shifted, we've moved beyond race, etc. But that's nonsense. In fact, the world is still governed by the same white supremacy as it was in Churchill's day. It just looks a bit different. And so if you were to really have an honest assessment of Winston Churchill, his legacy, what he did, you would then have to have an honest assessment of the British Empire, where we are today, and also what happens in the world today. How do we have the wealth that we have? What does the world never again? How do we make, and if you look at how we approach racism, it basically is, how do we keep out people like the Nazis? That's it. How do we legislate them out, or we keep them from power, or we put them in prison? That's what racism is. And this is why people, when you say someone like Churchill's a racist, this is why people get so upset, right? Because Nazis are racist. He was fighting a racist, so he can't possibly be racist. And this is a really terrible way to understand racism, or to understand the Nazis as well. So the Nazis aren't an aberration. There's a book by Zygmunt Bauman called Modernity and Holocaust, which I do recommend everybody reads. Excellent book, where he makes the argument, actually, no, the Holocaust could not have happened in any other social formation than Western modernity. Like, it's not an outlier at all. It's the complete logic of the West. Just the only difference is that it's brought to bear in Europe with people we would consider white, right? If you actually think about the mechanics of what the Holocaust was, genocide, killing millions of people because they'd been deemed racially inferior. We'd seen that before. This was not new. This is not a novel thing. This is kind of the foundation of what the West is. In fact, if you chart the West to 1492, when Columbus sailed the ocean blue, what is the first, that is kind of the main springboard through which everything else comes from. And what is the first act of Europe in the Americas? It is the largest genocide that's ever existed on the planet, killing up to the midpoint estimate of people who died in the Americas is 70 million people. Like, it's insane.